10 viewers, so let's get started. Is that all right with everyone? Good stuff. We have hit 10. Wonderful. Let's get going. So thank you very much for joining us today. My name is Rachel Clark, and I am the Business Engagement and Knowledge Exchange Manager at Bournemouth University Business School. And if you have any questions or comments whilst we're talking, please do put them up in the chat or the Q&A, and we will get to them sort of as we see them, or perhaps after someone has finished talking. So the session description is that this session features health tech and medtech stakeholders across the north and south of England, nationwide, if you will. And the purpose of this session is to discuss the challenges, trends, and opportunities faced by those companies within health tech and medtech, including differences and similarities. So just to introduce this a bit further, the health tech and medtech arena is full of enterprising and innovative companies, many aiming to develop the next step change in their respective fields. So we're joined by experts within the health tech and medtech worlds to explore the challenges of working within these fields, trends which could be embraced or avoided, and also opportunities which could then be seized. But just to be clear, when referring to health tech, we mean consumer facing, whereas medtech is used to treat or diagnose by a healthcare professional. So that's the differences between the health tech and the medtech. So today I'm joined by Anastasia Bolokova, BD. So I didn't actually find out what BD stood for, but when we get to introduce you, please do say. BD lead for life sciences at Bruntwood SciTech. Niall Clark, the Commercial Director of University Hospitals Southampton. Phil Carvel, Health Tech Cluster Manager at the Science and Technologies Facilities Council. And Steve Parr, Healthcare, Digital Health and MedTech Lead for the Enterprise M3 Growth Hub. So I'd like to welcome the panel and also for you to introduce yourselves. So Anastasia, did you want to go first?
Hi, everyone. Nice to, thanks for inviting to be on the panel today. I'm Business Development Lead for Bruntwood SciTech. My background is cell and gene therapy with application in oncology. And my role now is to strengthen and expand the ecosystem of science parks in Bruntwood portfolio.
Wonderful. Thank you. Niall?
Hi, I'm Niall. I'm the Commercial Director for University Hospital Southampton NHS Foundation Trust, which is a group of hospitals in Southampton on the south coast, and I cover all enterprise-related activity. So part of that portfolio includes the commercialisation of intellectual property, whether that's derived from us as a trust, and also includes the appraisal and evaluation of new and emerging technologies, either that's through commercial clinical trials or through full clinical evaluations, or even better than that, the co-development of novel tech with enterprising SMEs. That's the sweet spot for us.
Thank you. Phil, did you want to go next?
Yes, good morning, everyone. So I'm Phil Carvel. I'm the Cluster Development Manager for the Science and Technology Facilities Council, STFC. STFC is one of 9 organisations which form UK Research and Innovation, so UKRI, and I'm located in the north of England. So the Northern National Laboratory, the Daresbury Laboratory, is located at SciTech Daresbury, and that's the campus where I'm hosted normally in my day job when I'm not in my living room working on Zoom. And I head up our regional health and life sciences cluster, as well as co-lead our space cluster. And just one final thing going, so my background is human physiology but also my specialist area is space physiology, how the body changes in space. So I'm very interested in cross-sector innovation and looking forward to our panel discussion today.
Excellent, thank you. And Steve?
Yes, good morning, everyone. I'm Steve Parr. Thanks very much for the invitation to be on this panel. I wear a few hats, but basically what I'm doing day to day is working with medtech, healthcare and digital health companies to support their commercialization, their growth and their sales. And as I mentioned, I wear a few hats. I sit on the SBRI Healthcare Award panel as a commercial expert. I sit on the Health Innovation panel of the Wessex AHSN and a few other things as well. So it's great to be here. And geographically, I'm based in Surrey, which I guess is definitely in the south.
Yes, there are a few of us in the south here today. Thank you.
But I'm a northerner, I should say. I was born in Huddersfield, so perhaps that counts in this conversation, which is definitely in the north. Apologies.
Wonderful, thank you. So covering both angles there. So to kick us off with our first question, that is for all of you to reflect on and respond to, please. It's, as it appears as though that the health tech and the medtech sectors have exploded recently, especially with the global pandemic and the need to accelerate those medical solutions. What is your view on the solutions coming out or that you have come across in terms of meeting unmet needs, relevance and usability? And are there any key or upcoming trends that companies or end users should be aware of or expecting? Quite a long one.
Well, if I could just perhaps start with a couple of obvious ones, we'll get them out of the way. If we're looking at during the pandemic, clearly video consultation with GPs was absolutely crucial. It remains, unfortunately, a political issue. I'm well aware of that, but let's just stick to the clinical side and the technology side. Offering those video consultations prior to the pandemic, clearly there was quite a lot, well, perhaps I shouldn't comment, quite a bit of resistance really to using it with the health system, expecting people to, to go in, to park their cars, to pay all the overhead, which apart from damaging the planet was a large waste of time. And when we had the pandemic, suddenly there was much greater need to look for video consultation. So I think that's great. And I don't wish to comment politically, but where that ends up with people having the choice to go face to face with a GP or to do it remotely, I think that extra choice is absolutely fantastic to have. And just on the commercial side, I note that Induction Healthcare Group that bought the Australian company Attend Anywhere in spring this year looks in retrospect like an absolutely fantastic move. There are two prime video suppliers to the NHS. One is obviously Teams, which we're all aware of, but Attend Anywhere is a great. It's less of a sort of conferencing point to point. It's much more of a clinical consultation video facility. And that acquisition of Attend Anywhere seems in retrospect to be absolutely fantastic. And one of the other initiatives, just sticking with during the pandemic, if you like, but pointing to the future, and I know the AHSNs were leading in promoting this, was the COVID oximetry at home initiative, which they were supporting throughout 2020 and 2021, which was basically people with a suspicion of COVID to get them to do their pulse oximetry measurements at home rather than interfacing with the healthcare system or hospitals. And therefore, when they perhaps had to go into hospital after self-monitoring, they were at a further point along this sort of diagnostic route, if you like. So sort of two highlights of the during pandemic, I would say.
Yeah, I'd add to that by saying that another consequence of the COVID-19 pandemic was that it removed barriers to innovation adoption. So we had a plethora of innovations related to protecting healthcare workers, novel forms of PPE. In the south, there was a novel respirator developed between an SME university, Southampton, and our trust, which was adopted at scale and rolled out to quite a few trusts. But apart from that, I think there's been a lot more technologies come forward which look at remote monitoring of vital signs and integrating those into a longitudinal health record. Those that can integrate are much more valuable as opposed to being standalone. So I've seen that happen, and there's been a few platforms which have looked at trying to get people out of hospital faster, because that's the problem we have at the moment, a big backlog of patients for elective surgery, and that's very punishing financially on providers. You get penalized very heavily if you don't meet targets, and that's very, very hard to hit. So those are two things that we noticed from the acute sector.
Wonderful. Anastasia or Phil, do you have anything to add to that too?
Yeah, I think I can comment on both. And so for instance, I'm based in Alderley Park mainly, but based in the north, and cover other sites as well, like Birmingham, Cambridge. And in Alderley Park, we set up so-called Lighthouse Labs, which is a national COVID testing facility. And I think for us, the main, what I noticed, the greatest outcome was innovations and thinking outside the box. So, for instance, a number of companies, they repositioned themselves into COVID space. And when I meet people who work there, by default, I assume they're biologists, undergrad students doing placement. No, they were people who were doing art or music in London, and they wanted to play in the musicals, but because everything was closed, they came back north to their parents. They lived with them, and they worked in the Lighthouse Labs. So I think it's incredible because they learned the skills. And actually, the most fascinating story was that I met several people who decided that after finishing their degree in music or whatever they wanted to do first, they now want to become scientists. I think it's really powerful. Secondly, I can give an example again of innovations. Literally just recently came from the International Clinical Exchange Program between the Northern UK Teaching Hospital and one of the largest hospitals in Barcelona. And there, clinicians partnered together with automotive company. Everybody knows them, but I prefer not to say the names. And they created basically solutions in MedSpace device. In particular, the basically to support patients who needed assistance with breathing. And it's incredible when we see this kind of two STEM subjects merging together and creating solutions within the weeks rather than years, and then instantly was approved.
Excellent, thank you. And Phil?
So I'll just comment on two aspects on that. So firstly, in terms of the solutions coming out to either unmet needs, particularly looking at COVID, I think we saw some fantastic examples of collaboration, so between organizations, particularly in the treatment of either new antiviral products, whether it be surface acting products or looking to be test products. So I think there's some great examples of collaboration there, particularly some examples I saw were from Perfectus Biomed, and other sort of contract research organizations pivoting their labs to support those other companies which are coming up with products and solutions, but needed the expertise to do that sort of viral testing. So I think that was one thing we saw quite a lot of companies or innovators or coming up with ideas for antiviral products and solutions, particularly for their industrial application, and then needing that expertise to actually do that testing and evaluation. So I think particularly from those organizations, it's great to see them, really promoting themselves, that they had this capability and they could work with companies to support the antiviral side. I know particularly when quite a lot of labs and shut down during the pandemic, those sort of ones which are working, particularly in those areas, were busier than ever, really, working there every single day, trying to provide those valuations to those unmet needs. I think the other thing we saw as well, in not so much the antiviral side, but more in the monitoring side, particularly in care homes, we saw quite a lot of solutions being developed to try and help care homes and those sort of social care housing to have better improved monitoring. So again, using digital technologies. And there were some great examples where companies had developed a product for a similar setting, so SafeSex here, and then they screen slightly changed. Can you still hear me?
Yes.
Oh, sorry. Had developed a product, and then it pivoted to a different application area. So SafeSex was a great one there. So again, a company based in the Northwest, and then sort of had scaled their solution across sort of the health service, working with partners in Manchester and beyond to really take their application to support a need in care homes. So I think those are some examples that I've definitely seen of great practice, but also those organizations building collaboration with others to either evaluate or scale adoption. So I think those are great practices coming out. I think in terms of key things coming out, and we've seen this already, I'll post a few links in the chat window, is regulation. So we already knew about the changes to the medical device regulation and in vitro diagnostic regulation, so MDR, IVDR. So those changes have been coming for a number of years now. So we've seen the impact of those coming out. So that's certainly something which companies, particularly in MedTech, need to be fully aware of if they are looking at markets, but also with their own sort of regulatory authority as well, MHRA recently closing a consultation looking at the possible future frameworks of medical device regulation as well. So I think regulation's the key one, really, to the usability of innovations that companies, both new and existing, are certainly extremely active on, and if they're not active on, particularly at this stage, need to be. So if it's helpful to anyone in the listening audience, I'll post the latest consultation from MHRA, which just closed, in case that's helpful.
That does sound helpful. Thanks, Phil. So it sounds like there have been a multitude of challenges within this, which includes that political piece that Steve was talking about, and the regulations coming up that Phil was talking about too. But then a huge, I think, sort of trend going through that is the opportunities, which is around collaboration and how that's kind of exploded as well within the last sort of 18 months or so, even though it was always there, but the kind of necessity driving that piece. So in your experience, what challenges do you think that the health or medtech sector will face as we come out of the pandemic? I know that you've touched on some of those already, especially around the regulatory side, Phil, but perhaps someone may want to jump in and explain further on that one.
I can comment on that maybe slightly. Definitely what we noticed, we work really closely with the key stakeholders like the hospitals and governmental organizations that help getting access to NHS, like NHR. And definitely what we noticed was that because the clinicians were so overstretched, it was extremely challenging to get in contact with and in touch with NHS, even though maybe companies had great solutions. So I think that was the main, observation, because obviously clinicians were, all the energy and force were pushed towards COVID. I think now I want to see not just the challenges, but more positive things. I think definitely we noticed that the government is trying to support and injected quite a lot of cash, into the life science sector, and it's obviously fantastic news. However, like everywhere else, somewhere new bottlenecks can be created. So I think now it's just a matter of managing it correctly.
Yeah, I think to that point, that's very good. It's quite easy to get caught up in the sort of, particularly in the last 2 years, are you COVID, which gets a priority, or are you health business as usual? And unfortunately, you have to be deprioritized. I think Anastasia makes a fantastic point there, because there is this third category, which is, the NHS, they put 8.1 billion into their COVID recovery plan. It's like a third area, which is get us back on track, if you like, with a particular focus on what was previously business as usual. And then you've also got the NHS Confederation's NHS Reset Programme, particularly, focusing on building back the elective care as well. So I'm not sure if that's answering precisely. I think there's challenge and opportunity there. You've got these three tiers. We can't move away from COVID, carry on with all the background business as usual, but this third category of actually helping reset the NHS, reduce the waiting lists. And there's certainly a lot of focus. People at number 10 are actively focusing on how to get elective care back on track. And as I say, there are many billions applied to do it. And I think that's quite a useful way to structure your approach to the healthcare system and how to support it.
I'd add to that by saying that anything that can help stratify patients or optimize them before they go into elective surgery is going to be welcome, because that'll increase speed through the process. It really, they're only finite resources. So getting patients out of hospital and monitoring them after they've been discharged through technology, that's going to be very, very important to prevent readmission or minimize the risk, and optimize them pre. So those are any technologies that work either side of that will consider the hospital an engine room, core engine room. If you can speed up those two pieces of process either side, that's going to be optimal.
Yeah. And continuing that thought of remote monitoring, again, just as sort of challenges and opportunities, this is more of an opportunity. The other thing that came into focus, again, with the sort of two-tier COVID and non-COVID, was clinical trials. So I know a lot of, what do we call them out there? Let's just call them cynics, have been suspicious at the speed with which vaccines have been made available. But we in the healthcare system, we know that all that's happened is that the collaboration's gone up and the approvals process was speeded up, and it had a huge focus. the clinical trial stuff wasn't short-circuited, but it shone a light on an area I've been involved in for quite a while, which is this remote monitoring. To take Niall's point, and the old wearables were slowly coming in, and we'll say, well, we'll do clinical trials. We don't want to test people by bringing them into clinical centres. We'll be able to do it in situ, at home, in the real world, 24/7. But it wasn't really happening. And that was one of the things I think the industry will probably say they got a boost, but not as much as they would like, because going forward, anyone that can really do that remote monitoring, it is a double whammy. It's not about saying we got COVID, so you can't come into a centre. It is, as I say, it's about getting real world data. You want the data of how a particular drug in a trial might work in the real world. And to get that data of how it works in the real world, often you have a clinical trial where you say, could you just get on a train, then a taxi, then come into a hospital, then wait, and then we'll monitor you. And that data isn't real world. And the great opportunity of remote monitoring, which the COVID challenge, the pandemic challenge focus was, if we can get wearables and remote monitoring sorted, you can get this much better data, more voluminous data, but in the real world. So yeah, it's not just a shout out for wearables, but just this remote monitoring, as Niall was talking about, and specifically the area of clinical trials.
Yeah, I think there's more opportunity now for commercial clinical trials for MedTech than there might have been 2 years ago. Absolutely, there isn't it. And in terms of there being a boundary to that, it doesn't really matter as long as there's a clinical safety case that justifies a use, and the usual hoops have to be jumped through. That's fine, and things are moving at pace. Even with notified bodies, things are happening a bit more rapidly, and they have to because of the impact of the COVID pandemic.
No, I think I just want to reflect on a few of those points if I can, Rachel. So it's on that clinical trial. So probably under the envelope of the required evidence generation that companies need to develop for their products and services. I think, again, I won't go into more in the clinical trial space, but even at the earlier stage, so that sort of evidence evaluation, it's been very pleasing to see a number of both among the HSNs and other sort of infrastructure like NHR's MedTech cooperatives stepping into that space to provide that sort of signposting capability to both clinicians to get that, is this a solution that this company has developed which has a audience for it, so a need-driven solution or problem solution, or are there elements within their solution which need to be adapted to really, meet the audience needs. So it's good to see some of those initiatives stepping up both during COVID and post-COVID. And examples of those ones have been like the Health Matters programs, which the HSNs have been running. And that's all been funded from ERDF funding, working with universities and the health service to really sort of bring that sort of evidence generation around it. And in terms of the clinical trials, we've heard already, I think going forward, while there was certainly a delay in the ability for clinical trials to be done, which weren't COVID-19 related, we're starting to see some of that, backlog creeping out now, and then sort of other mechanisms, both for the commercial side, as well as sort of the more advanced platforms to even support the paperwork generation in sort of clinical trial development to improve the speed and process. So I think as we look at evidence generation as a whole, both for piloting, clinical feedback, and then that clinical trial element, I think there is significant opportunity as well as a requirement to maybe think outside the box slightly when we're looking at evidence generation. I think that's incredibly important. I think the other ones which we can maybe go into in a bit more detail as well a bit later on is the international side. So again, looking at how that changed during this sort of online perspectives we're having now. So now we're seeing that unlocking of more trade missions physically happening, as well as sort of that access to sort of other markets, both in terms of what that means for investment requirements, as well as what that could mean for other implications, such as regulatory requirements if you're going into other markets, or even understanding the models used for procurement and other settings. For instance, the insurance-based model of America and the FDA rules compared to what the UK has in terms of the NHS structure, so public sector recruitment. So I think it's quite interesting when we look at going, what are these challenges companies face and have faced, and now with the coming out of COVID, what that means for some of those challenges. Do they become more opportunities, or is there still a need to have that access to expert insights to really break down some of those barriers?
Thanks all, and that actually leads us on really nicely to the next question. Though before I get there, I see there's a question in the chat which Nala's jumped on. Thank you for that, but just to highlight in case anyone else wants to respond too. So the next question is about opportunities, and what opportunities do you think exist for health or medtech companies that would allow them to demonstrate end user or patient benefit? And are there any examples or case studies that you could talk us through?
We've got one where certainly improving throughput. So we talked earlier on about diagnostics. We talked about there's an increasing volume of patients. In fact, if you look at providers, despite the thought that less people come to hospital, actually more come to hospital. And so looking at diagnostics, automation of processing technologies has allowed pathology specimens to be processed much more rapidly. In our case, we started with saliva and with using lab testing technology in a lab with a partner organization. I'll give them a shameless plug, Automated Technologies. And we're looking at how that technology can be used more broadly to scale up and process pathology specimens of different types at scale. The faster you can process, obviously that's a good thing. So I think there's a case there. Robotics is a hot area, and a hot area for investment, as is AI. And that's why you're seeing venture capital firms piling in and giving quite robust, quite strong post-money valuations to these companies, because they are transformative. Some of the tech that's going through. So it's just an example. Process technology.
Wonderful, thank you. Does anyone else have any examples as well that they'd like to talk through?
Well, in terms of the opportunity for the medtech companies, I know that NIHR is a sponsor of this, and it's well worth, if people don't know, as a medtech company, one of their specific programs is research for patient benefit, which has a subspeciality in the social care area. So if there's anybody listening that has something, to your point, Rachel, to your question about patient benefit, it's always great to work with the NIHR as because working with them obviously puts you at the leading edge of what we're doing in the NHS in this country, but it's also a great badge if you have an eye to exports later. NIHR can be slightly complex and hard to work with, but to your point about patient benefit, that our research for patient benefit program is precisely designed to do that. And as I say, don't forget there's a social care subspeciality as well.
Thank you. Anyone else? Oh yeah, Phil.
Yes, very extremely briefly. So I'll just build one more point on that plug from Steve there. I think particularly to support the opportunities around patient benefit, it's certainly worth looking at NHR's Ifright funding calls. So particularly the Connect and Challenge, and some of those are open right at this moment. So certainly I'll find a link as well and put in the chat window, but do have a look at those funding calls, say specifically to support that sort of product and product development, as well as sort of that sort of evidence generation as well. So do have a look at those funding calls, which were live all the way through COVID as well as now as well. So do keep an eye on those, as well as the other ones from UKRI and other sources.
And if you are looking at those, do so today, because they're closing extremely soon. They've been out for a while, in other words. So don't make a note to follow up Phil's link next week. I advise you to do it ASAP.
Great, thank you. And just in the interest of time, we've got a few minutes left. So one final question, but again, for all of you, if you're able to share your views, where do you see the future of health or medtech within the north and south of England? And do you see any specific geographical barriers or opportunities within that? Or even a divide at all?
I wouldn't say there's so much of a divide. I think the fact that we can communicate effectively digitally now and don't have to waste so much time commuting, going places in person, has taken away boundaries that might have existed and made things more efficient. I think there's probably, the MedTech hubs are really valuable, a great initiative. There's probably room for more. There's a gap in the south. I'll be open about that. But they make a lot of sense. The NIHR is a really well-regarded body, and I think the UK can become more important generally as a magnet for MedTech, much more so than perhaps it has been in the past. So I think there's probably a shift coming about. But in terms of models that work, there are a number of exemplars of collaborations between the private and public sector. You're going to see more of that, I think, going forward.
Yeah, I mean, I would tend to agree. I don't really see many national boundaries. The NIHR is, it's funding across the country. There might be some regional funding, I suppose, that is available. In fact, there's quite a lot, I guess, but I don't tend to see it as MedTech specific. You've got the Northern Health Science Alliance. That's as close as it gets, and a very good body as well, actually, in sort of refining the North's story. But don't really see anything in the south that's at the same sort of level. So I think barriers, particularly in MedTech, seem to be fairly low.
Interesting, thank you. Anastasia, what do you think?
I think I echo what was mentioned earlier, but at the same time, I feel there are some clusters. Obviously, we don't want to divide really much into north, south, west, east. However, naturally, there might be some. I did notice through just by attending some of the events that have been hosted, for instance, in the north, virtually, that now more and more companies from the south are attending them. But then organizers say that in the past it wasn't the case. So in this case, technology actually builds a bridge rather than creates the wall. So I think it's great. At the same time, obviously there are some kind of regional clusters or key players, and it's always great to see collaboration between not just the private organizations, but also across the disciplinary and between, say, key stakeholders like private organizations and governmental ones. But saying that, I completely agree that some of the organizations like NIHR cover across the whole country. So I think it's just a matter of communicating right message. When it comes to Brentwood SciTech, now, for instance, our sites are expanding significantly, and actually that's the task for us. So to connect the cities, I studied in Manchester, I worked in the Northwest, and then now my big challenge for the next few months or years would be, for instance, Midlands and Birmingham, so to see what are the opportunities there. And they're fantastic, but we just never had actually maybe opportunity to work that closely. Another one would be Cambridge. Obviously, there's a lot of things happening already, but it would be really good to connect to strengthen this even further. So hopefully our idea of connecting cities works and will help as well.
If I can just follow up on a few of the things, Rachel. So I think just going back to one of the first points earlier, so in terms of having that collective articulation of the opportunity for companies as well as sort of government nationally and internationally, I think that's incredibly useful to supporting those cross-border interactions. And the Northern Health Science Alliance recently published a report on the Northern Life Science Supercluster. I think it's really interesting reading there, particularly when you look at the expertise that companies can leverage, what they're not aware of. I think particularly when we're looking to support companies, where they be SMEs or even spinning into the health company or corporates, etc., the amount of expertise that sometimes we don't talk about, which companies can leverage, is sometimes substantial, and we're seeing those sort of boundaries breaking down. So I'm just going to post that link to that report in the chat window from NHSA. And I think in terms of those expertise that we see in the north that have been highlighted, particularly for endemic infectious diseases, has been a huge one. So particularly the ICON program led by the Liverpool School of Tropical Medicine has seen significant opportunity for companies to utilize the expertise in the consortium approach and then help evaluate and develop new solutions by using existing platforms rather than invest in ones which they don't necessarily need to do. And we've seen this quite a lot within the Science and Technology Facilities Council. As a council, we are charged with operating national facilities for the UK, which are used by multiple sectors, such as the Diamond Light Source, which did some of that initial sort of crystallography scanning of the virus during the early stages of the pandemic to help with that target solution. and particularly at our Harwell campus, and there are a number of these national facilities used by multiple sectors as well as Pacific for Health. So you have the Vaccines Manufacturing Innovation Centre nearly complete there, Nucleic Acid Therapeutics Accelerator, NATA, and a number of other ones which are Pacific Health and Life Sciences, particularly Rosalind Franklin Institute. So I think what we'll see more of, as Anastasia was alluding to here, particularly from virtual, but even as we come out of it, is talking about these amazing national infrastructures we have, but ensuring they are not just used by the local communities, but are used for the benefit of the whole of the UK. So initiatives that Bruntwood SciTech there are championing in terms of connecting their campuses across the UK and their communities, initiatives that we're doing, working with partners like Bruntwood in the Northwest with the health tech cluster and connecting to our other clusters, the Harwell Health Tech cluster and others. I think we'll see more of this cross-cluster interaction, and the more we can do that connection nationally and then internationally, I think we'll see more investment in this area, but also a connection to solutions so they can scale up and use the latest technology and the latest skills so they don't need to invest it themselves. So as Neil said, consortium approaches are hugely valuable, and I can't wait to see more of these happening.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Thank you. There's so much going on within these sectors, so it's important to link up and collaborate so there's not duplications and whatnot, that the population aren't missing out as well. I see Niall has posted some things in the chat, which is really useful, and please do take a read if you haven't already. But we are reaching the close of our session at the moment. So thank you very much to the panel for taking the time to share their views and expertise and joining us today. And I hope you found this roundtable useful. So thank you very much for joining us, and do connect with us if you'd like to continue this discussion further. Thank you.
Thank you, Rachel.
Thank you, Rachel.
Thank you.